Alright friends, welcome to Flight Test Tech. In this video, we're going to be showing you how to build the main airframe of the FT Flerken. The FT Flerken is a fantastic flying wing. It's also going to be incredibly versatile with different motor configurations and tail configurations. This playlist is going to show you how to build everything that you see right here, from the nose to the wings to your servos to your elevons and your main body. After you're done with that video, you're going to have the option to go to your next videos, which are going to include your tail assembly and also your motor and electronic options. Let's go ahead and get our materials in order and we'll get started. So the first step we're going to do in building the FT Flerken is going to be building the main body. Now what I'm going to be doing in this video is I'm going to be showing you the piece, and I'm also going to be describing how we're going to condition that piece to go together. This is a little bit different than our typical build. We will have A folds and B folds, but most of this plane is going to be bevel cuts and foldovers. So I really want to take the time to show you the whole entire piece, and then at that point you can pause the video and then you can make sure it looks just like the piece I'm working with before we move on to the next step. Now to start our project here, we're going to first pop out the two main pieces of our main body, and that's going to be the lower plate and also the upper bay. Once we pop these out, let's go ahead and weed out all the extra pieces we need, the foam inside, and also release the paper for our foldovers. We have all of our holes popped out. One tip I like to do is I like to dull the tip of my razor blade on one side and then keep the other side sharp. And this gives me the ability to be able to cut down from my score cuts all the way to the paper without cutting through it. You can simply go out to your concrete sidewalk, rub the tip of the razor blade on that, it'll dull it up perfectly. And then that way, when you go through and you cut the score cuts to go down to the paper, you're not cutting all the way through it. Make sure you test this on a scrap piece of foam though before you go into your kit. I'm just gonna outline every score cut we have now, going right down to the paper, and then I can simply pull out the extra foam and make my cavities and my fold over. Easy way to release the foam, just fold it over 180 degrees and then roll, pulling away from the foam. Anytime that you remove foam, make sure that the foam removes clearly all the way down to the paper. If there's any extra residual foam, you can simply use the tip of your razor blade to scrape that clean. The cleaner that your cavity is or the foldover area is, the better the end product's gonna look and the easier the plane's gonna go together. Now that we have all our pieces popped out, go ahead and feel free to pause the video, make sure it looks exactly like what you see here, and then we're gonna take our glue gun and we're gonna start gluing things together. Now that we have everything popped out, let's go ahead and put our attention towards the main body piece. You're gonna notice there's a score cut that's included in the kit to make the kit fold together. We wanna glue that together. So the first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna reach over, grab one of our scrap pieces of foam of all the pieces that we popped out, and then we're gonna take our hot glue gun and we're gonna put a nice bead of glue right down the middle. Anytime that you have a cavity you gotta hop over, make sure you stop your glue gun roughly about 1/4 inch from the edge. That's gonna make it really easy for it to be able to not squeeze out and cause little glue globs. Also, if you have any extra residual, just go ahead and wipe it over and wipe the extra off. It's always really easy to figure out exactly how much glue to put on where you don't have a lot of extra weight and waste, but at the same time you have a really strong joint. This piece is done. Let's go ahead and let that dry and put our attention towards our foldovers. We want to do our foldovers on the paper first almost every time because it's a lot easier to handle the piece before it's folded together. To do a foldover, on this gun I'm going to make sure my temperature is right around medium. Give me plenty of dry time. I'm going to start and stop the hot glue roughly about 1/4 inch. I'm only going to do one piece at a time. And what I like to do is take that piece up 90 degrees, count to 10, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and then take it right down to the table. And as I take it down to the table, I'm going to pull slightly towards me or away from me depending on your orientation. And that's going to keep it from gluing to the table and then give me a nice tight glue joint. The reason why we want to count to 10 with it on the top is we want this to be as square as possible. If it's not truly square and you're not happy, you can take a scrap piece of foam and rub right on top of it. Also, if say you have a couple little edges flaring up, that's not a big deal. You can always go back with a little bit of glue and smear it over. Let's go ahead and do the rest of our foldovers. Now oftentimes you see me using the table as my friend, whether it's holding folds together, whether it's pressing down, or whether it's even smearing glue. One trick you can use if you have a work table, you can spray it down with a thing like Camp Dry or silicone, or you can use a scraper, a razor blade, or even a steel ruler and then scrape it off. Make sure you keep your table nice and clean between steps because the glue globs can dent your foam as you build on. So between each step, I like to kind of come back, scrape my table clean, and then continue building. Now that we have our foldovers, let's go ahead and do our A-folds. A-folds are where the side plates are above the bottom plate. To to do a proper A-fold, we're gonna leave the side plate on the table and we're gonna rotate the bottom plate up 90 degrees, making sure that it's underneath the side plate. Basically, you should be able to look at the logo and you should see how the side plates are orientated. You wanna match that cross section. So first we're gonna practice it. Side plates against the table, we're rotating up 90 degrees, pushing firmly down against the table. And we wanna make sure we don't go past 90 or under 90. Now that we're happy with that, I'm gonna focus most of my glue starting and stopping about 1/4 inch from each edge. And I'm gonna put my glue right on the bottom of the side plate. And we can rotate up 90 degrees. And we're gonna press firmly down against the table to give us a nice square angle. All right, we've let about 40 seconds go by here. We're gonna do the same process on the other side. We always make sure that we give it plenty of time to dry and we always check our angles. Also, we wanna make sure that we always test fit things. It gives us good muscle memory and it also helps us to know that everything's gonna fit together properly. Let's go ahead and now focus the glue again on the very bottom, starting and stopping, 1/4 inch from each side. And now we're gonna rotate up 90 degrees, pressing firmly against the table to get that right angle, and we'll give ourselves about 45 seconds. This is gonna be our main piece for the upper bay of our Flerken. To mount this now, we're gonna go ahead and do a test fit, and we're gonna line up these tabs right over the top of each other and press down. If you have a little bit of difficulty lining these up, you can pinch your tabs just a little bit to give them a little bit of a taper to make them slide in. What you wanna make sure though is that you have no gap in these areas here. You want this to be firmly against your main plate. Now that we have all this test fit, we're ready to glue this together. We want to make sure that we don't put glue over in this section here. We only want to put glue on the back section. So take note where this ends, and that way when we pop it off, we're not putting glue up here. We're only putting glue back here. Right back down onto the piece. Little wiggle, making sure everything's firmly pressed flat down on the table. You're going to know that your alignment's perfect based on the rear slot for the firewall and also the holes for access are all aligned properly. So our main section of our body is now done. Let's go ahead and pop out an additional piece and get it ready to glue on. I'm going to put this aside and we'll pop out our next piece. The piece that we're going to want is going to be the main rear cover, and that's going to be this piece right here. Take your time because there's lots of different angles here, and this one I would definitely recommend using a razor blade and just cutting along the tabs. Now that we have our main piece cut out, let's go ahead and do our score cuts and remove the foam of the areas that we need to do foldovers for. And just like before, we're gonna go back with our glue and we're gonna do our foldovers. Let's go ahead and work from one side all the way around to the other. Easy way to do the foldovers for this one is to simply rotate this 90 degrees, and now we can use the table as our friend and we can roll it over. Now that we have all of our foldovers, let's put a bead of glue right down the middle. Now it's very important that we avoid the glue around this seam right here. The reason being is this is going to be where the hatch is going to detach from this main portion of the body to go onto the front nose. We don't want to glue this seam shut or it's going to be difficult to cut this nose out later. So make sure when you go down this seam that you stop about 1/2 inch instead of 1/4 inch from each side. Got plenty of glue in my glue gun. Put a thin bead of glue right down here. I'm going to stop about 1/2 inch. And then right then, again, right there. Now when I smear this, I'm going to smear away from that seam so I don't accidentally go over top of it. Just like that. We're going to give this about 45 seconds to cool, and then we're going to work on our louvers. Now that our center section is glued together, take the tip of a ballpoint pen and trace over the score cuts on the 3 louvers on each side. What we're looking to do is just crush down the foam inside the score cut so they'll easily bend up. Now that you have that done so these easily bend, find some scrap pieces of foam like what you see here and then break them into 3s. Next, one at a time, we're going to focus our glue right down in that area that we opened up, and with our finger on the bottom, we're going to lift up, and we're simply going to put a little foam shim in, just like you see here. We're going to do this on all 6 pieces. Now that we have our louvers done, we can leave these pieces in as long as we want. Give them a couple minutes to fully dry, because when you finally pull these out, you want to make sure the glue is hard enough where the louvers don't move. Now that we have our louvers done, let's go ahead and put our attention towards the bevel cuts. Now it's really important that some areas we're going to do a single bevel cut on one specific side, and other areas we're going to do a double bevel cut. I'm going to walk you through step by step on first the single bevels, then we'll go ahead and do the double bevels. So the first single bevel we're going to want to do is going to be on the outer portion of the score line right here. So we're going to fold this over 180 degrees, and we're going to use a nice sharp razor blade. One reason I love these Flite test knives is that you can detent them just like this. It gives you the perfect angle to be able to cut a really nice bevel cut. We're going to make sure we do the single bevel cut on the outer panel. So now I'm going to take my knife, and I'll make sure I stay just above the paper as I pull it on through. Next, we're going to do another single bevel, and this time it's going to be on this side of the rear top hatch. So we're going to make sure that we fold this over, and we're going to do our bevel cut on the louvered side. These don't need to be incredibly sharp. There we go. Let's do the same exact steps now on the other side. So again, here's the outer panel, single bevel. Fold it over again, and single bevel. The last single bevels we're going to do on both sides is best done when the piece is sitting flat on the table. I'm going to go ahead and extend my knife just like this, and we don't need to get this perfect. We're just going to go ahead and trim a piece here and continue this bevel right here. There we go. Feel free to take a moment, pause your video, make sure that your single bevels are looking exactly like what you see here. All right, now we're going to put our attention towards the double bevels. The areas we're going to put the double bevels will be on the seams here and here. So basically on both sides. We're going to start with the same outer piece, and I'll go ahead and flip it over and do this one first. And I can go here. Now we can flip it over and work back the other way. Now there are a couple other methods where you can get a bevel, and that is where you use a hard block and maybe some 60 grit sandpaper, and you can simply sand it. Just make sure if you are sanding it that you're not loosening the paper onto the foam. And same process on the other side. And just as before, feel free to pause the video, study this piece, make sure your piece looks exactly like that, and we'll move on to our next step. Our next step here is to attach our latch. Our latch is going to go right over this etched mark area that you see here. In your kit, you're going to have an included hardwood piece that's going to go ahead and match that. And we're going to also pop out the rear clasp that you see here. This piece is going to fit exactly right over this portion here, but it's very important that we don't put any glue where you see it going around. That's going to need to be able to open up and close, so when we slide our hatch in, it'll easily grab it and be able to release it at the same time. Once we've aligned everything up and make sure we're happy with it, we're going to focus our glue right around the back half. We don't have to put a ton on there. It's very important that we line it exactly right over top of the edge marks. We push down firmly and get a nice flat fit. Also, if you have any extra glue that squeezes out, make sure you squeegee that off so we get the best fit onto our main body. Let's go ahead and bring our main body portion back in, and we're going to do a quick test fit. For this, we're going to position the nose facing away from us. In this case, it's pointing towards you on the camera. And we're going to fit the body right over top. Now that plywood piece should also give you the proper spacing that we need on our main body. Next, we're going to fold out the outer flanges, and we're going to line it up with the tab. We want to make sure before we do any gluing that all of our seams are nice and flat against the bottom. We're gonna take this one step at a time, and it's really important that we meter how much glue we put down because we're going to be establishing the angles, but we're not gonna yet glue the piece together. We're gonna start with the inside and then work towards the outside. We're also gonna make sure that we avoid putting any glue where any of these seams are because we want this to be able to cut off later. So now that we have everything fit, it's nice and flat, it looks good, we can pop this off. And I'm gonna open this up as far as I can, and I'm gonna put a very thin ribbon of glue right at the seam here. We want just enough to be able to hold this together, but not so much that it squeezes out. And again, I'm hopping over by at least a half of an inch around the areas that I need to cut. Now we can go right back to the table again. We're gonna go ahead and fit those pieces right in the little dash marks. There we go, there's one, there's two. And we're gonna hold that in place for about 30 seconds. You're gonna now see once that glue is fully dry, we can pop this loose and this form is now held nice and symmetrical. We're gonna now do the exact same process on this portion here and this portion, again making sure we avoid by at least a half of an inch the area that we're gonna cut. So I'm gonna open this up as wide as I can, put a fairly thin bead of glue down, hop over, thin bead of glue. Same process now on the other side, hop over, thin bead of glue. Back down to the table. Find our tabs. There's one, there's two. And just make sure we have this fully seated down. And we're gonna hold this in place for about 30 to 40 seconds. Now that our front portion is fully dried, we're gonna put our attention towards the back and we're gonna leave this in place. We're first gonna do a test fit, making sure that this comes down, rests firmly against the upper bay. And we're also gonna fold this in so this lines up flush with the front. And you should notice this back goes right to the point of the crease right here. Once you're happy with the way everything fits, you can come back. Again, we're gonna put a nice thin bead of glue right in this seam here. And then I'm just gonna kind of focus this glue right above the seam, let gravity take it down right over top. Then we're gonna go right back down again. And we're gonna hold it in place. Let's do the same process on the other side. Always do a test fit, nice and flush here, tips right at the point here. This is firmly against the upper bay. Now we can open this up. Thin bead of glue right in that seam. And then again, we're gonna go just above the hole, let gravity kind of pull it down right over that piece of paper in the middle. And we'll take it right down. Find our marks again, nice and flush in the front, right at the point in the back, firmly against the upper bay in the middle. Give us about 30-40 seconds and we'll move on to our next step. Now that these pieces are down, we can carefully go ahead and lift up and the whole entire piece should lift off for us. At this point, we can come back with any glue and we can reinforce along these seams. Now it's really important as we reinforce this that we don't put any glue in the areas that we're going to be cutting and connecting dots to remove our hatch. So let's go ahead and simply put a bead of glue and just trace this. This is one reason why I really enjoy having the glue gun turned down a little bit in temperature. The glue is a little bit more thicker, it doesn't burn your fingers if you accidentally touch it, and it comes out nice and smooth. One little note that I did just think about is make sure when you reinforce this top piece that you don't get it too thick or it's not going to fit well on your piece. There we go. I'm just going to scrape off any extra in that area because I do not want that to grab. There we go. And I'm just going to lay this loosely right here, let it rest. Now that this piece has been reinforced, we have one more step before we attach it, and we're going to go to our kits and we're going to take two of our extensions and we're going to pre-route this. It's really important that we do this because if we don't do it now, it's going to make it a little bit more difficult in the future to grab our servo leads. So I'm just going to take a piece of tape, tape it down here, we'll run that up to there. It's really important that you make sure that you put the wider end, the one end that receives the servo lead, on the outside, and the portion that goes in the receiver, which is the male side like here, goes towards the middle. Same on the other side. And one last test fit is all we need to do. We're just going to make sure this sits down nice and flush. And we can also position our little servo leads wherever we want here, just to make sure that they line up with the little hole. That looks great. Now at this point, we're gonna go ahead and apply our glue and we're gonna glue our top hatch down. We're basically, to attach the hatch, we're only gonna apply glue on the bottom side where we see the white open foam, and also from the cut that you see here, back. So feel free to watch me and then go ahead and repeat the process. I'm gonna start and stop again, a good 1/2 inch from the edges, all the way back on here, all the way back on here. And I'm gonna put a nice healthy bead right here, and then right on the edge on both sides. Now we're gonna come back down. No reason to be anxious and hurry. We're gonna make sure we open this up to get on both sides of that wooden clasp there. And when we do that, everything should fit down nice and snug. And let's go and hold this for about a minute. Just doing a quick inspection here. If anything is popping up, you can still have a little bit of time to push it down nice and flat. We want this to be strong because this is where a lot of our strength from our design comes from. Once we're happy with that, we can trace an outer bead right along these edges, again making sure we don't go ahead and accidentally glue our hatch together and we start punting for our back. While this is drying, I'm going to put this aside. I'm going to go ahead and locate the outer wing portions that go onto the main body. Now at this point, we're going to go ahead and start conditioning the 2 wing sections that are going to go on the outer part of the body here. Before we do that, we don't want to cover up these lower seams that the hatch is going to eventually be removed. So I'm going to go ahead and take my razor blade now, and I'm going to carefully cut down a little saw motion all the way flat against the table. Make sure that this can gently wiggle, and then we're going to cut up to the dot. To do this right, you should be able to see that you can gently wiggle this back and forth. That's fully released from the back piece. Same process on the other side. Just slide it in, just a little bit of saw motion all the way to the paper, and reverse it. Take it right up to the dot, like that. And just give it a little gentle wiggle to make sure that it'll fully release. Our next step is we're going to cut a single bevel on this portion. This is going to be where our wing is going to fold together. Doesn't have to be too extreme, but make sure that you don't go below the paper on the bottom. There's one side. And we'll do the other. It's always easy just to come back, a little bit of a saw motion, especially when you're doing it reversing the camera. There we go. Now this piece is prepared. Let's go ahead and open these little formers here, 180 degrees, and we're going to glue them together, all 4 of them. All 4 are identical, so you don't have to worry about what order they go in. There's one. All right, so these are what I consider basically subspars. What they're going to give us is they're going to give us the form of the wing that needs to go out, where it kind of actually tapers up into the body, but it's also going to give us a lot of strength tying the outer wing to the center body. And where these are going to go are going to be right on the section here. Now it's really important that you get this in the right orientation, and that's going to be where the bottom is a 90, and then also on the angled side here is going to be the thicker part. And these are simply going to set down just like this. And once we have that shape, thin beaded glue is all we need. And we're going to glue those down into place. Again, we're making sure that the narrower side is pointing towards where the wingtips are going to be, and then the thicker side, the higher side, is going to be pointing inboard. Also make sure that you're inside the score cuts on this 3rd piece back. And there's 2. Basically just making sure I'm about 1 millimeter on the inside. It doesn't have to be absolutely perfect. Take a moment, pause the video if you need, and make sure that your piece looks just like what you see here. Once you're happy with that, let's go ahead and do the other side exactly the same. I'm just going to mirror it to make sure I get everything orientated properly. Next, we're going to cut a single bevel on the front portion of our outer wing panel. To do that, we're simply going to lay this right over top, keep above the paper, and cut it off. Now we can go ahead and begin to fit these 2 pieces together. It's going to be really important that we put all of our attention on the very front portion here, and as we're fitting this, we may need to reposition this wing so that this piece, when it folds over, is tight against the main body. To do this easily, you can simply take a piece of tape. Sticky tape is really good and handy. We're going to put on one side, I'm gonna lift up on the main body. I'm gonna get my alignment right where I want it. Again, I'm looking more at lining the very front tip up exactly, right there. I'm gonna press down firmly. I'm gonna try to do this reverse here for you. Now when I fold this over, if everything goes right, what we should see is these pieces line up beautifully, just like that. If you have more of a gap than you'd like to see on this front section, that's not a problem. All you simply need to do is move that in just a little bit more and it'll close the gap. Keep in mind that this is specifically a little bit loose because we want that hatch to go in and out easily. Now, typical with all of our other wings, we're gonna go ahead and put a thin bead of glue on each one of these bevels. We're gonna repeat this step again, and then we're gonna let that wing hold its shape. So now that we're happy with that, we're gonna go down 1, 2, and 3. Repeat that fold one more time. Push it nice and tight up against the wing. Notice I'm also pushing my finger flat, holding those two formers down nice and firm, and allowing this to kind of cut back. What you should see is a real nice cross section of an airfoil. Now that we're happy with that, let's go ahead and open this up. You can see that our airfoil now has its shape. I'm also going to make sure that I untape this a little bit. Make sure there's plenty of room to stick out. And we're going to put a bead of glue on the bottom here, on the main section, and just enough glue left to go on the trailing edge. Fold that over, nice and slow. Again, working it right up against the body there. And then we're pressing down the two formers flat up against, making sure that this portion is nice and parallel. And we're gonna hold this for about 45 seconds. Let's go ahead and now do the exact same process on the other side. When the other side's done, we're gonna come back with a bead of glue, and then we're gonna seal the wing against the body. Same process as before. We have a single bevel on the bottom side of the outer wing. We're gonna take a piece of tape. Make sure it's nice sticky tape firmly pressed against it. And we're gonna line up our edges. There we go. Press down firmly. And we'll carefully, slowly morph this over, making sure it rests firmly against the body. Once we're happy with the placement, we'll put a thin bead of glue over the top of each score cut on the wing to lock in its shape. 1, 2, 3, and back fold it over again, forming it down. Make sure that when you're holding this in place, that as you hold this in place, that this first seam here is just slightly lower than the back seam. You should see a nice cross section of an airfoil. Once this is locked in place, I'm going to go ahead and kind of release my tape from the extension here and make sure it's not going to hit the spar. And then we're going to place a bead of glue right on the leading edge, the bottom of my two sub spars, and on the trailing edge. Back fold it over for one last time. Again, we're letting it drag right against that body. And I'm going to make sure my trailing edge is firmly against the bottom plate, and that my wing airfoil, everything looks good. And then I'm going to press and hold. Just because I'm pushing down on the plane does not mean I'm using a lot of force. I'm just focusing the pressure where I need. It's really easy to practice with a scrap piece of foam to see at what point it wrinkles, but soft hands in strategic places will give you a beautiful smooth finish, while you can still be very strategic in where you push it down and get a good strong joint. All right. Now that we have our wing portions done, it's really starting to come together. Our last step is to put a bead of glue pushed down inside this crack that you see right along the seam. And this is incredibly important because the tremendous amount of your strength from your wing is going to come from this glue joint specifically. So make sure that you get your glue tip right down in there and you push as much glue as possible, and then follow up with a little squeegee and squeegee off the rest. It's also really important that you do not go forward of this little dot that you see right here. That's going to be the part that's going to be removed. You don't want to accidentally glue your hatch in place. So let's go ahead and start with this one. I'll start from the back. Notice I'm focusing all my glue here. I'm taking nice and slow, pushing that glue right down in the very small open gap there. Same process here. I have my glue at medium, and I'm going to stop about 1/4 inch from there. And I'm just going to come back here. And scrape off the excess. Exact same process now on the other side. I'm gonna start 1/4 inch from the bubble. Again, we don't want any glue up where the hatch is gonna be. Putting all my glue right down, letting it creep right in the small little cavity there. Going nice and slow. This is almost like caulking a bathtub. But dry, come right back afterwards. And there we go. We're going to give this plenty of time to dry. We're going to make sure it's sitting on a nice flat surface so the wing stays level. Let's go ahead and put our attention now towards the wings. All right, so for the 2 outer wing panels, we're first going to get all the pieces we need. That's going to be our main wing panels, our center spars, and our wing tips. You can also see that I went ahead and did my score cuts, revealing the paper around the wing tips, the inner wing panels, and also I removed any holes that we needed for the servos to pass through or for the control horns. Make sure that your pieces look just like this before we move on to the next step. And along with prepping these wing pieces, we're also going to go ahead and prep our servos because these servos are going to be inside the wing. You will not be able to remove them when you're done. Make sure that both your servos are centered and that you select the single servo arms and mount them so they're opposing each other's direction. If you've never centered a servo before, we have a great video that can be linked down in the description to show you exactly how to do so. So we're going to go ahead and divide these into the left and right wing, and we're going to focus on this side of the wing first. The first thing we want to do is mend the bottom surface of our wing with a bead of glue and then lay it flat on the table. While it's drying, we can do the same process on the other side. Let's go ahead and condition our spars by simply folding these over 180 degrees. We'll apply a little bit of glue in the middle, and then we'll fold them down. While it's drying, we can do the same process on the other side. And there's 2. Our next step is to do a double bevel on the leading edge that you see right here. The leading edge is 1 score cut up from the seam that you just glued together. So we're going to fold this in half right here. And you can see that the razor blade's kind of balling up the foam. That means that this razor blade's dull. I'm going to go ahead and pop in a new one. It's really important whenever you do a double bevel, make sure that you can easily go past 90 degrees. If you can't go past 90 degrees, this is going to be too blunt and it's going to cause the shape of your wing to be not correct. So make sure you can easily fold this up without any resistance past 90 degrees. Next, we're going to go and line up our spars. Now both these spars are the same, and it's going to be very important that you line up the edge of the spar with the edge of the wing here. You're going to notice that there's a gap on the wingtip. That's going to allow the wingtip to sit in, and then also that the servo arm hole lines up inside. Once you're happy with the way everything lines up, apply a bead of glue right on the bottom of the spar. Notice I'm kind of keeping it inward more. Go right back down to the table. Line up between the 2 score cuts, and then keep the spar aligned with the root of the wing. If you lined everything correctly, you'll notice that the servo arm will pass clean through the top surface of the wing. Now we're going to take one of our centered servos, and for this we're going to have the lead pointing towards the trailing edge of the wing, which is going to be right here, and you're going to notice that this is going to collide. All we simply need to do is take our razor blade, and from the one flap to the bottom of the servo, just go ahead and pull that off. Our servos have been centered, so I can slightly rotate this out of the way, straight down. We'll do a quick test fit. And that looks great. We want this to be nice and solid, so if you have a sticker like what we have on our one servo, I'm going to remove that and I'm going to scrape up the edge with a razor blade. This is going to allow the hot glue to really grip into this very well. If your servos are oily, it's a good idea to clean them off with a little bit of alcohol to make sure that fatty oil doesn't keep the servo from gluing in. Now we can apply a bead of glue right on the bottom, and I'm going to go right on the back here. going to set this down in place just as we did before. Press it nice and flat. Now that our servo's installed, we're going to take our thumbs and we're just going to allow the 3 bends, 1, 2, and 3, to establish themselves. And as we bend this over, we're going to use the flats of our hands to line up our wing. Now it's really important when we bend this over, what we want to see is we want to see the tip here be nice and flush and the wingtip be nice and flush. So if you need to kind of favor a little bit more one way or the other, that's absolutely okay. Once we're happy with the way it aligns, we're going to take the tip of our hot glue gun. We're going to put 3 beads down right over the score lines. And then just like we did with our center section on our main body, we're going to come down, we're going to establish a shape, and then we're going to hold it in place. Notice I'm putting a little bit of pressure right on the tip here just to hold it at the right angle that I want to see. After about 30 seconds, you'll see that the whole wing has its shape now, the airfoil is locked in. We can then go back one last time. I'm going to place a bead of glue right on the leading edge, the main spar, go a little bit on the servo there as well, and then a thin bead right down the trailing edge of the upper wing skin. And back over to the table one last time. There we go. And we're going to hold it in place. And once again, I'm just checking on both sides of the wing to make sure that the upper wing skin tips line up with the bottom skin. And also, while we're holding this down, this is going to be a little bit of a sharper bend on the outer wing panel, so I like to make sure that I focus on that portion a little bit more. After about a minute, our wing is done. Let's go ahead and do the exact same process now on the other side. Our next step is to do a double bevel on the leading edge that you see right here. The leading edge is 1 score cut up from the seam that you just glued together. Next, we're going to go ahead and line up our spars. Once you're happy with the way everything lines up, apply a bead of glue right on the bottom of the spar. Notice I'm kind of keeping it inward more. Line up between the 2 score cuts, and then keep the spar aligned with the root of the wing. We're going to take our thumbs and we're just going to allow the 3 bends to establish themselves. And as we bend this over, we're going to use the flats of our hands to line up our wing. Once we're happy with the way it aligns, we're going to take the tip of our hot glue gun. We're going to put 3 beads down right over the score lines. And then just like we did with our center section on our main body, we're going to come down, we're going to establish a shape, and then we're going to hold it in place. Now we're going to take one of our centered servos, let's take our razor blade, and from the one flap to the bottom of the servo, just go ahead and pull that off. Now we can apply a bead of glue right on the bottom, and I'm going to go right on the back here. And we're going to set this down in place just as we did before. Press it nice and flat. After about 30 seconds, you'll see that the whole wing has its shape now, the airfoil is locked in. We can then go back one last time. I'm going to place a bead of glue right on the leading edge, the main spar, and then a thin bead right down the trailing edge of the upper wing skin. Back over to the table one last time, and we're going to hold it in place. Our 2 outer wing panels are now done. We are going to hold off on cutting any elevons until after we install them on the plane and we're hooking up our electronics because we want this to stay nice and flat and easy to handle. So now at this point we can bring our center section back in and we can attach it to our body. So I got my main body here and I got my 2 wing panels. I'm going to go ahead and put one aside right now. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take a piece of tape and I'm going to apply it on the very bottom here, and that's going to help me line up my wing and also stick to the bottom. So let's go ahead and grab a 2-inch piece of tape here. I'm going to split it roughly in half. And the easiest way to get this applied is to flip it over on the table and then just run your finger over the paper like you see here. I should have my little servo end right there. Let me pull that out. And I'm going to go ahead and connect these 2. It's really important that we line up the signal with the signal. So it's kind of hard to see, but you'll see that the little orange wire is here. I'm going to line those 2 up. Just like that. Push those together. And then later on I'll be able to pull this all the way through. But for right now, we'll just go ahead and tuck this in. Now once we have our servo connections done, I flipped over both my wing and my center body, and I'm just going to go ahead and line this up. And notice that I have my wingtip rested on just one single piece of foam, one scrap piece. That's going to give us the perfect amount of dihedral. No gauges needed. And the easiest way to do it is to focus on the trailing edge, line this up, and pull in the wing right towards the center here. We're going to line this up just like that, press it down into place. This will give us a nice tight seam on the bottom, give us the right amount of dihedral for when we glue this together. Now that we're happy with the way everything fits, we're simply going to open this up like a door and put a nice heavy bead of glue right where the paper and the bottom foam are, all the way back, and a nice healthy bead of glue right on the top surface of the wing like you see here. There we go. Pop that loose. And then we'll flip this over. So I'm going to press that against the table, make sure we have a nice bead right there. Now we can flip it over on its back. My left hand is simply keeping the body nice and level, and my right hand smoothing that out. Give this a good 2 minutes to fully dry before you move on to the next step. All right, after a couple minutes and everything's fully dry, we can flip this over. And we're going to put a nice healthy bead of glue right on this top seam and then cap it with a piece of tape. Just like we did with the main body, we're going to go right down, put the glue right over that seam. This is really going to make a nice solid joint for us. Follow up with a scrap piece of foam. Smooth out that joint. And if any part of this wing doesn't quite match, all we simply need to do, just put a little bit of pressure wherever it doesn't quite match up perfectly, and then hold it in place. Just make sure you don't change the amount of dihedral you have. Then finally, once that's dry, cap it off with a piece of tape. I'm just going to go not on the single surface, but on this portion right here. Let's do the exact same process now on the other side. I should have my little servo end right there. And I'm going to go ahead and connect these two. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take a piece of tape and I'm going to apply it on the very bottom here, and that's going to help me line up my wing and also stick to the bottom. Now once we have our servo connections done, I flipped over both my wing and my center body, and I'm just going to go ahead and line this up, and notice that I have my wingtip rested on just one single piece of foam, one scrap piece. That's going to give us the perfect amount of dihedral. Now that we're happy with the way everything fits, we're simply going to open this up like a door and put a nice heavy bead of glue right where the paper and the bottom foam are, and a nice healthy bead of glue right on the top surface of the wing like you see here. Now we can flip it over on its back. My left hand is simply keeping the body nice and level. Give this a good 2 minutes to fully dry before you move on to the next step. All right, after a couple minutes and everything's fully dry, we can flip this over. And we're going to put a nice healthy bead of glue right on this top seam and then cap it with a piece of tape. All right, so we have our main wing section now married to it, and you'll be amazed how incredibly strong this is. The last detail is more cosmetic than anything. We're going to go ahead and install these little wing tips here, and you see we've already weeded them out. The biggest thing you may need to do is a little bit of custom cutting if they don't slide right in, which is absolutely fine. Easiest way to do this is just simply hold this up, kind of rotate it in. You want somewhat of a loose fit, and mine's actually really close to being there. I just need to trim a little bit off the very top here, so I'm just going to smooth out this whole upper edge. Let's go ahead and do one last little fit here. We can work with that just a little bit more right here. Now that we're happy with the way it fits, be very careful not to burn our fingers. There's one stripe, there's two stripes. We made this extra wide so it's a little bit easier to handle. Slide it right in. Then we'll use the table as our friend and press it down nice and flat. I like to kind of rock it back and forth just a little bit. If for any reason that you had some kind of glue glob sticking out there, obviously make sure you empty those or get rid of those beforehand. Now we can come back with a razor blade and trim off the excess. That's one wingtip. Let's do the exact same process now on the other side. Just a quick test fit here, see what we need to trim. I just need to trim a little bit off the very top here, so I'm just going to smooth out this whole upper edge. That looks great. Now that we're happy with the way it fits, be very careful not to burn our fingers. Then we'll use the table as our friend and press it down nice and flat. I like to kind of rock it back and forth just a little bit. Now we can come back with a razor blade and trim off the excess. Now that we have the top section pretty much complete, we're going to go ahead and move on to the bottom former. And this bottom former is going to help us give the shape to the front nose. So the first thing we want to do is locate these two pieces in our kit, and then we'll go ahead and pop them out and prepare them like we've been doing before. Feel free to pause the video if you need, but make sure that your pieces look exactly like this. We have our 2 channels cleared out on both sides, and then we also have all the circles and ovals cut out that we're going to need so we can properly assemble the plane. We can go ahead and put our doubler to the side right now. Let's go ahead and put our attention towards this front piece here. We're going to be doing an A-fold. An A-fold means that the side plate is above the bottom plate. To do a proper A-fold, we're going to keep the side plate firmly against the table, and we're going to rotate the bottom plate up 90 degrees, pushing down against the table. Once you're happy with the fit, you can take our hot glue gun, and we're going to place a nice bead of glue, starting and stopping about 1/4 inch from the edges on all the sides that we want to glue together. A little dot in the back is all we need there. And right up to the table to 90 degrees. Give this about 30 to 40 seconds to fully dry. Same process on the other side now. Quick test fold, make sure that all the sides meet firmly against the table whenever we fold that up. If one side doesn't go all the way against the table, there's a good chance that you have a little bit of foam in your channel that you need to clean out. Once you're happy with that, bead of glue right on the bottom. And back up 90 degrees, pressing firmly down against the table, and then hold for about 40 seconds. Next, we're going to do a quick test fit of our doubler. And when we do our doubler, we're going to make sure that we fit in, lining up all the holes that we see here, and also the sides and the front edge. Once we're happy with that fit, we can flip it over, place a nice healthy bead of glue all around, then back down on the table. Just kind of give it a rock back and forth, and then take your time making sure everything lines up perfectly. Now this is going to be the bottom plate for our FT Flerken. This is going to be able to hold either your FPV gear, or it can also hold your battery. Oftentimes people may want their battery up high and their gear down low, or vice versa, depending on the configuration. This can do both. You're going to notice that the battery straps can pass from the top down or from the bottom up. This will give you the ability to be able to have those different configurations. Let's go ahead and give this a quick test fit and see how it fits on the plane. All right, we're going to bring back our plane here, and just give these little tabs a little pinch here is all we need to do. And right down on a spot. And if we did everything right, what we should see is a nice pass through for all the battery straps. The doubler is now touching the top plate just like so, and everything meets nice and flush. Once we're happy with that fit, we can pull this off. And I'm going to place the glue mostly on this portion here, and then I'm going to come down to the skinnier piece just so we don't put glue wider than what it needs to be. Right back down on the table. Little rocking motion is always helpful. Again, we're going to come back and we're going to make sure that everything on the front is tied together, all of our holes line up, and then we're going to put nice gentle pressure, not too sharp, making sure everything lays nice and flat. Give this plenty of time to dry, and if you'd like to, you can come back and reinforce all your seams front and back and on the top with a bead of glue just to give it a little bit of extra strength. We now have the internal structure down to the airplane. Let's go ahead and put our attention towards the nose and get that ready. Alright, so this is the front piece of our nose. This is going to wrap completely around the top of the Flerken down to the bottom here. First things we want to do is we want to go ahead and glue this seam shut, and then we're also going to go ahead and remove the paper and the areas that the paper is going to overlap or be a fold over. Let's go ahead and do that now. First we'll start with gluing the seam shut. Make sure we hold this nice and flat until it's fully dry, or else the nose may have a little curve in it. Now that the center is done, let's go ahead and remove the extra foam for both our foldovers, and then also where the paper is going to ride right on the top piece here. Now the paper's removed, let's go ahead and do our foldovers on the 2 sides right here. Now that our foldovers are done, we're going to put our attention towards our bevel cuts. The first 2 bevel cuts we're going to do are going to be single bevel cuts. It's very important that you make sure that you put these outside the centerpiece of the top nose. In other words, we're going to put the single cut on this side and this side of our score line. Just keep it right above the paper. There we go. on the other side. Just make sure we have plenty of room here to bend up a little bit beyond what we need for the actual piece itself. This is because we don't want the glue to squeeze out and accidentally glue down our nose to our former. These are the only 2 single bevel cuts that we need to do. All the rest are going to go ahead and be double bevels. Let's go ahead and do that right now, and then feel free to pause the video and make sure that your piece looks just like what we have here. And for a recap, we have 2 single cuts on the outboard side of the center of the nose, and then double bevels all the way through. And of course, we're not doing any bevel cuts on the outer pieces because those are going to fold around and meet together. Let's bring the nose of our Flerken back in, and we're going to start with a test fit. Now I'm going to do this in reverse so you can get the best angle possible here, but what we want to do is we first want to line up the center creases right on the very top, and then we gently want to just let the nose relax, just like you see here. If everything is proper, you're going to notice that the piece meets nice and flat and that the piece of paper overlays perfectly right on the front, just like this. The first thing we want to do is we want to lock in this angle before we glue it onto the back of the nose. So let's go ahead and do that now. It's going to be the same way that we did the back piece. We're going to put a very thin ribbon of glue right on the seams, and then we're going to hold this down, being very careful not to accidentally glue the nose to the airplane. So I'm going to open this up as wide as I possibly can. I'm going to put a really thin bead of glue on both sides, starting and stopping about a ½ inch from the edge. Just pretend like you're making a reinforced glue hinge. Go right back down to the table. We're going to line up our center. There we go. I'm going to hold this for a second or so. Doesn't hurt just to give a little wiggle every 10 seconds or so, and then just reposition it. You're going to notice with this plane you do a lot of bevel cuts. Lots of times we're using soft hands, and lots of times we're locking in angles. This technique also gives you a lot of freedoms if you like designing your own airplanes to make it some really crazy shapes like what you see here. You can see that that shape is now locked in. It's not going anywhere. We can go ahead and lock in this seam with a nice bead of glue. There's one. There's two. Just make sure that you don't put it down on the airplane and accidentally stick it to the plane. Our next step is we're going to go ahead and fasten on the front nose to this back piece. Now this piece is going to get cut off right here at the very end of this step. So this will lock this down, give us a proper angle, so as we fold this around, everything will line up perfectly. For doing this, we want to make sure that we don't accidentally glue anything to the centerpiece here. So we're going to go ahead and start and stop our glue a good ½ inch before. We can always come back later and put a little reinforcement if we want to. All right, got just enough glue hopefully. I'm going to put a little bead of glue. Again, I'm starting and stopping about a ½ inch from the edge. Carefully go right down, drop that into place, press it back and in. Putting a lot of energy to make sure that the nose is fully pressed back against that piece and that the score lines directly line up. Precision really is going to matter just to make sure that all the geometry as this wraps around is perfect. We're going to give this about a minute to fully dry, and then we'll move on to the next step. You can see now, it's called the flying Flerken. You can see now that the nose is on and we have these wings here we got to address. Let's go ahead and flip this over upside down, and we're going to start working now on wrapping this around here. One good thing to just start out doing is just to make sure that we have our geometry fairly close. If you can't easily wrap this around like what you see here, or maybe one side's more cocked than the other, you may have one of your bevel cuts that need to be trimmed just a little bit more. So a good simple test fit before we put this together is always going to really help you out. And that looks good. Notice when I'm test fitting, I'm holding both my fingers on both sides. Everything wraps around very nicely. Now this is the motion that we're going to do 3 or 4 times as we glue this together. Now that we've practiced that motion and we know what we need to do, let's first start with a bead of glue on both sides right here. Now when we fold this together, we're going to just concentrate mostly on making sure it wraps around. We're going to hold it together, and then we're going to use our 2 pointer fingers and we're going to press that again, making it nice and flush with the back side of the nose. And this one we can be a little bit more generous on. We'll put a bead of glue down this side, bead of glue down the other, and And then also just a touch of glue on the two vertical pieces. Make sure you don't accidentally glue that to the nose or to the bottom plate. There we go. And we'll go right up here. I'm gonna line these up perfectly, nice and flush. And then we're just gonna confirm that everything is nice and symmetrical with our thumbs. It's always important that we come back to the geometry that we're gonna need the nose to sit at just to make sure everything's lined up properly. You have a tremendous amount of angles here and you want them to stay nice and symmetrical. All right, we've let about a minute pass here. You can see that everything's looking nice and even. And our next joint now is gonna be the 2 bevel cuts on both sides that you see here. So glue, and then the same on the other side. We're gonna save this for the very last. So again, I have plenty of glue in my hot glue gun. I'm gonna avoid going all the way to the edge and accidentally glue my nose to the very front there. 1, 2, same on the other side. Kind of let gravity do us a favor and seep down where it needs to. There we go. Then right back up like we did before. Again, holding the nose in place, pressing those seams together. And then, you are my sunshine, happy birthday, you pick the song. All right, so our last step in the nose here is to put 2 beads of glue, one on the bevel here, and then one on the center. We're gonna do this on both sides. Make sure that you keep this bead of glue here incredibly thin so we don't accidentally glue it to the nose. If you have any angles that aren't symmetrical, you can simply just rock it back and forth ever so slightly. And we're gonna want this piece to join as flat as possible. That looks good. We're gonna open this up nice and wide. Again, a very thin bead of glue right over the paper to establish that angle. And a thicker one on the bottom. If anything accidentally kind of comes down, like that piece is a little close, just wipe it off with a piece of scrap or your finger. And we're gonna hold that right down. Keep it nice and flat. And we're gonna hold that for about 45 seconds. So you can see we have a beautiful nose formed. Our next step is to prep the bottom piece that's gonna go up against the nose before we cut it out. This is gonna be the rear bottom piece of our FT Flerken. The first thing we wanna do is do our score cuts and also prepare our louvers like we did before. Let's go do that right now. I'm just gonna take my pen and you're gonna notice that these actually bend in reverse here. So the seam that we're gonna need to crush is right on this side. Go ahead and do that right now. 1, 2, and 3. That opens nice. Glue. There's 1. Let's go ahead and let that dry for about 40 seconds and then we can remove our foam. Once the glue is dry and hard, we can remove our little shims here. And now we can go ahead and start preparing this. Let's go ahead and first start by doing our foldovers. Same process as before, starting and stopping the glue about 1/4 inch from the edge, doing one flap at a time. And this one, probably better to take to the edge of the table because there is actually a slight bevel. Easiest thing to do for this flap is just to fold that over. Another bead of glue. There we go. I'm just gonna put a little bit more glue down there. You know, these folders always don't look the prettiest here, but they do add a lot of strength to your plane. Now that we have our foldovers done, let's go ahead and cut a single bevel on both sides of the outside of the score line. Then we'll go around the whole outside. This rear bevel cut's going to be much deeper because it needs to meet nice and flat against the foam. There we go. We have all of our bevel cuts for our rear bottom piece here. Make sure you pause the video, make sure your piece looks exactly like what you see. What you're gonna see is a single bevel cut on the outside of the score line in the center, and then a bevel cut all the way around the perimeter, along with where it's gonna bend on the back. Now when we fit this onto our airplane, we may have to adjust some of our bevel cuts, making them a little bit deeper to get the proper fit. This piece is kind of custom fit to match up with our nose. Let's go ahead and bring our Flerken back in. We're gonna flip it over on its back, and we're gonna do a quick test fit here. There we go. Just gonna hold the nose down. That's actually looking really, really good. You're gonna notice that when we get our angle here, we can push this piece all the way up against the very front nose, and then we're just gonna carefully line that up to make sure it's nice and flush. We're gonna wanna make sure that we have plenty of glue in our glue gun here, because we're gonna go ahead and glue our glue seams and also this front piece down. Make sure also that you don't let the glue squeeze out and glue your front nose to the airplane accidentally. So we're first gonna start with our seams, starting and stopping about a 1/2 inch from the front. We're gonna go right down to our bevels. There's one, and there's two. And then finally, we're gonna start about a 1/2 inch from the back, put a nice healthy bead of glue right on the bottom piece here. No need to rush, same motion that we did before. We're gonna slide this all the way up against the front nose, center it up, and then press it down into place. All right, we've given that plenty of time to dry, everything's firmly down. Let's go ahead and fit our back piece now. We're gonna fold our back piece down so the paper on the front piece shingles over top of the rear piece. This is gonna give us a nice clean fit. We're gonna have a little bit of pressure here that we're gonna need to push up against, and that's gonna give it a really good crush. Once we're happy with that fit, same process as before. Make sure you have plenty of glue in your hot glue gun. We're gonna put beads of glue in the seams around the perimeter and also the center joint right here. Let's go ahead and do that. We'll just open this up. Seam, seam. Let's put it above the crack here, let gravity help us out while we're gluing the rest. And then all the way around the perimeter. Whenever I do glue on a bevel cut, I always let gravity kind of help it down. That way we're not fighting it. There we go. Right down in. We're going to shingle this underneath the front, and then we're going to put all of our attention on the very back. And if we do this properly, we're going to get a nice tight joint on both sides, shingled. Everything looks great. Let's go ahead and hold this for about 45 seconds. It's going to be under pressure, so make sure the glue is fully hardened before you remove pressure. All right, our back section is now done. Let's go ahead and flip this over 180 degrees, and let's cut off our nose. Now to remove the nose, use a nice sharp blade, and we're going to connect the dot with the cut line here on all sides. And if you remember earlier, we already pre-cut the two side pieces, so all we need to do is do the top here. Let's go ahead and first start with this piece, little rocking motion, and I can feel that released. Next piece. Keep in mind we have a former there, we don't want to cut that in half, so we're only going about the width of the foam. There's our next piece. Right over to the other dot. Feel that one releasing. And finally this one. And there we go. Perfectly formed nose. So one thing we can go back and do here is we can reinforce this with a little bit of glue smeared in, or we can go with a piece of tape folded over it. It's completely up to you. I'm just gonna go ahead and do a little bit of glue around these edges to reinforce it on both sides. Also, while we're talking about reinforcing, this would also be a good time to go back and put a bead of glue on the two bottom seams that we had to be very light on, and also a nice smeared glue right down the center. Once you have that, you can hold that flat up against the table, press down, and it's gonna make that bottom nice and true and even stronger. One difference you guys are gonna see from the final kit to this one is there's gonna be an access hole right here that you can pop out. This is gonna be for your finger to go through and then be able to pull back the nose. And also underneath it is gonna be a piece of plywood that's gonna reinforce it and also help you clip it into the front nose. Good friend Fred Provost, when he was beta building this, gave that suggestion. we made sure we put that into the final production. Next, we're going to go ahead and install the plywood clasp, and this is going to push into this square piece that we put the plywood down earlier, and the little thing's going to open and then close around it. To make this easy to slide in, take a little piece of sandpaper and sand it nice and round and smooth. If you don't have a piece of sandpaper, you can drag the back end of a razor blade over. We just want this to be nice and smooth. Now, an easy way to test this to make sure we don't have any glue globs in there, we're going to go down below the piece, we're going to pop it up in, and then with a gentle tug supporting the back end, what we should see is it slide in and out nice and clean. If it doesn't do this, go ahead and sand until you have a nice smooth motion. It should feel a little bit of resistance, and then grab it. Once we're happy with the fit and how it moves, we're going to go ahead and press it up against the plywood, and we're going to apply a little bit of glue on the very back end, and then we're going to press it in place. A little pro tip here is you can kind of slightly slide this down very gently, and that way you're not smearing the glue back and accidentally gluing your nose shut. So I'm just going to slide this down. On your prototype, you're going to see a circle right in the middle here for your finger to be able to pull it out, so just go around that, and we're going to go right around like this. We're going to slide our nose all the way back. You can see that we're not putting anything on there. And now we can take our back finger and we can press it up and in place. Now, it's really important that we have patience for this. Let it dry with plenty of time here before we pull this out. So we're going to give this a good couple minutes, holding that in place. Little tip also, you can kind of look back in there and make sure everything looks perfect, and it does. So after a couple minutes have passed here, let's go ahead and just give it a gentle tug straight forward. And now it should pop out really nice. And you can see that looks beautiful, nice and strong. We'll do one more quick test fit going in, and you're going to notice it keys down right in the middle of those two splines. Now we're going to put our attention towards the rear motor cover that covers the motor and the ESC. Now for this, we're going to need to remove our nose, so go ahead and just pop this off, put this someplace safe, and we're going to locate our rear cover and prepare it. So this here is our motor cover. The first thing we're going to do is score cut along our score lines and remove the foam from there for foldovers. Now make sure you don't just automatically do your foldovers, because we're going to cut a bevel cut on the two sides before we do so. Let's go ahead and we'll just do our quick score cuts. Next, we're going to complete the foldovers on this side and this side here. For the side with the bigger paper, you can put a little extra glue here. This is going to want to be nice and strong. Now that we have our two foldovers done, we're going to use the table as our friend. We're going to fold the paper back 180 degrees, exposing this edge. Now we can take our razor blade and we're going to cut a gentle bevel just like this. We don't have to go at a hard 45, maybe 30, 35 degrees. Same process on the other side. Fold it over 180 degrees. Nice gentle bevel. And now we can do our foldovers. This one's going to go more than 90 degrees, just find the flat. Down on the table, find where it's flat, hold it there, down, and then push. You can see we have a nice beveled, reinforced rear hatch, and you're going to see this is going to fit beautifully right up against here and then nest down in between the two sides. It's going to give a really cool detail and also add some function. Now that we're happy with our rear hatch, we're going to locate the piece that's included in our kit that looks just like this. Now this piece is going to be a push tab that's going to be able to help you lock down the back hatch without it sliding out. Now this is going to be under pressure, so handle it kind of gently, because we're not going to be taking this on and off every time we fly the airplane. What we would like to do is we're going to go ahead and remove this and make sure that you can easily seat this up in the puzzle piece just like that. Now keep in mind that this is only a 16th inch piece of plywood, so it is actually a little bit narrower than the 3/32 plywood that's attaching to, and that's on purpose. Once we know that this sits nice, there's no glue globs in our way, we're going to go ahead and do a quick test fit, and the side that I'd like you to test fit is the side with the bigger overlap. Just like that. Once we're happy with everything, we're going to put our glue on the back half, and it's really important that you only do the back half because we want this wood to bend very lightly. And then we're going to press our piece down into place, and then we're going to hold it there for about 2 minutes. Now after our 2 minutes is up, what we should be able to do is either take the tip of our screwdriver or a push rod, push down very gently, and this will pop off. You're gonna see it has a nice little kind of pop tab function here. So when we wanna slide it in, we simply just press down the tab, slides forward, and gives you a nice click. Now that's good for the front, but we need to do something for the back here to keep that down. And that's where we're gonna take our one included push rod wire, and we're gonna cut it about 1/4 to 1/2 inch larger than what it needs to be on each side. So we'll just go ahead and cut it right there. And if I slide this out, you're gonna see about 3/4 of a way up is gonna be where your firewall is gonna mount. We're gonna go ahead and pretty much split that right in the middle and go maybe about 1/2 inch, a little under 1/2 inch up. And that's gonna be where we're gonna glue this. Now this is where a little bit of forming goes into play, and we're gonna need to put this because every piece is gonna be a little bit different. What we wanna do is kind of put a little slight indent in here, and then also on each side, about 1/2 inch in, we're just gonna put a little bit of a bend. There's one, and there's two. Trying a couple new techniques here. I think it's gonna really kind of open up what we can do with foam board. And you're gonna see that this bend now kind of settles down in there very nicely. Taking a razor blade, we're gonna line it up where we indented with our wire, cut a very gentle little bend, kind of open it up a little bit. This isn't necessarily a structural piece, it's just simply to hold this down. And we'll do a quick test fit. You just want it just under the surface of the paper. Just like that, that looks good. Now we can come back with a bead of glue. I'm just gonna press it in place and then turn it up into position. We're gonna go ahead and let that dry for about 30-40 seconds, and then we can give it a test fit. All right, now that we have our piece formed, let's go ahead and give it one last test fit. Now the bottom should line up nice and neat, right underneath that foam. There we go. You can bend that down, pop it into place. Now you can see it's nice and secure on the back and also on the front. Now for cutting and installing our ailerons, the first thing we want to make sure that we do is that we recenter our servos. If you don't have a servo centering tool, you can hook up your receiver and attach your servos to it. Make sure all your trims are neutralized, and then they'll pop up nice and centered. If you have our Crafty kit, a centering tool is included with it, or you can get that by itself on our store. For this, I'm just going to go ahead and take out my ESC. And this is frankly the safest way to power your servos because it's giving you direct voltage from your BEC, which is inside of this guy right here. If you accidentally put 2 cells into this, where you say you plug a 2-cell battery in, you will destroy your servos and possibly even your servo centering tool. On here we have a little diagram that says in, and it gives me the minus, so I'm just going to plug that right there. And then for both of our servos, I'm going to go ahead and line this up, and they connect horizontally. I can do up to 3 servos at a time. And I'm making sure that I line up my ground pin with the ground signal. So signal, ground, there's the minus, there's the S. Now I can plug in my battery. And you see we have 3 buttons right here. One button's manual, that's right here. The next button is center, and that's the one that we want. And then the final one is cycle. Make sure for this application that we set this on center. Now we have a couple choices. We can just simply leave this all plugged in, or we can go back routinely and make sure that our servos stay centered the whole entire time that we work on it. In your kit, we're gonna go back to that thin plywood that we have, and we're gonna pop out our 2 control horns. And we're just gonna give this a temporary fit right in the slots. Notice we haven't cut out our hinge line yet because this is a fantastic way to make sure that everything is nice and neutral. In the kit, we give you 1 single long push rod here. You have plenty of tries to make plenty of different push rods, or you can choose to use linkage stoppers. For me, I personally would rather do a Z-bend, and if it's not right, either readjust it or just simply make a new one. You got plenty of tries here, don't worry about that. We're gonna line up our hole on the furthest out, going from the inward part of the wing towards that. So we're gonna go to the outermost hole on our servo arm, little rotation's all we need, and it'll pop on through. Next, I'm going to go right back to the holes, and I'm going to use my thumbnail, and I'm going to line it up right with the edge of the control horn hole. Make sure you go to the furthest hole from the hinge line to get the proper throws. So if that's going to be right there, I'm gonna go ahead and grab my pliers here. We do sell a handy dandy Z-bend tool, but I wanna show you how to do it without it so you don't have to buy the tool if you don't wish. We're gonna grip it right on the edge of my nail. And then we're gonna bend 90 degrees. Next, we're gonna grab it about 2 or 3 millimeters in, a little bit wider than the actual control horn itself, and we're gonna bend it vertical. Now we can go ahead and cut it about 1/4 inch or 8 millimeters. There we go. Now we can go ahead and lace this right on through the plywood. Little rotations, all we need to pop it on through. We'll go down and we'll give it one last check here. And that looks perfect. The holes are directly over where our hinge line is gonna be. We're gonna do the exact same process on the other side, and then we're gonna come back, we're gonna carefully just remove our control horn like you see here, and we're gonna cut our hinge line against the trailing edge of the top surface of the wing. Just simply gonna rebend another Z-bend. We're gonna grip it about 6 millimeters or so, 1/4 inch, 90 degrees. Up a little bit too far there. Rotate it about 3 millimeters or 1/8 of an inch, 90 degrees again. That gives us our modified Z-bend. And to make a standard Z-bend, we're just gonna grab that and slowly rotate it 90 degrees again. It's a super easy way to make a control horn Z-bend. And just like before, we're favoring from the inside of the wing towards the outside of the wing. Furthest hole out on the servo arm. I'm gonna line up on the outside of the control horn this time. Use my thumb as an indicator. Bend it in towards the fuselage. Grip it up 90. And if you don't want this to be a modified Z-bend, all you simply need to do is rotate that 90 degrees very slowly, and it'll turn into a standard Z-bend every time. Right. We're gonna line up the outermost hole of our control horn. Again, a very slight rotation, that's all you need. Pop on through. And then we're gonna check our fit one last time, making sure that the holes are directly over our hinge line, which they are. Now that we have our push rods and our control horns fitted, let's go ahead and pop the whole assembly over just like you see here. We're gonna cut our knife and gently cut a score cut right along the trailing edge of the top surface of the wing. And we're gonna stop right at the score cut there. Once we've cut our hinge line, we're gonna line up with the score cut that goes back towards the trailing edge, and we're gonna cut that all the way through. A little pro tip is to take your push rod wire, and once you've cut all the way through, drag this through back and forth a couple times. This is going to give us a really nice gap that's not going to rub when our servos move back and forth. Once we've cut through, we'll flip over our elevons 180 degrees and we'll cut a single bevel right on the back side of the elevon. Feel a little bit of resistance, which means I have a little bit too much material between the paper. Just go back again one more time. And that's perfect. So we want to make sure that we don't have any hard resistance as we press it down, or the servo is going to have to work and your plane's going to bind. Now that we have our hinge cut and it's moving easily both ways, we're going to reinforce it with a little bit of hot glue. To do that, all we simply need to do is put a nice bead of glue right over where the paper and the hinge meet, very thin, and then we'll scrape it off with a scrap piece of foam. Make sure that you get all the extra hot glue off so we don't have any buildup. We only want what's left to be what's adhering the paper and the foam together. Make sure this fully dries, and once it's fully dried to the touch, you can move it back around. Once our hinge line is nice and reinforced, we're going to go ahead and press this down in, and with our servo centered, we're going to go ahead and make a slight little adjustment here. This was originally adjusted nice and centered. We're going to go ahead and install the control horn. Again, you can see it's right over top of the hinge line, but we want to move the trailing edge of our elevon one width of foam up. So in other words, the bottom paper of the elevon will be touching the top paper of the main body. Once we're happy with that fit, we're going to put a nice healthy bead of glue right in the slot that we made. We're going to go back, we're going to adjust our elevons just like that, and then we're going to let it dry. Give this at least 2 minutes to fully dry because we don't want this to be weak. You can also go back later and put a reinforcement bead of glue on both sides of the elevon. Now this is dried, let's go ahead and do the other side. All right, so just like the other side, we're going to remove our control horn, We're going to take a nice sharp razor blade and follow the trailing edge of the top surface of the wing to create our hinge line. Once we've done our score cut, we're going to go to our score line going towards the trailing edge and cut it all the way through. Take a scrap piece of your push rod, press it down into place, rub it back and forth to give you a nice precision gap between your elevon and your main body. Flip the elevon over 180 degrees and cut a single bevel along your elevon. It's really important that there's no resistance between your elevon moving forwards or backwards. Once you're happy with your hinge line, we'll reinforce with a thin bead of hot glue right over the foam and the paper. Once our reinforcement hot glue hinge is dry, we'll just check our movement, make sure there's no glue globs or anything resisting it. And then we'll reposition our control horn, making sure that we raise the back trailing edge of our elevon up one width of foam so the bottom layer of the elevon matches with the top layer of the body. The last step in this video of the main body of our FT Flerken is going to be our front nose. Now this is going to all depend on how you want to equip your airplane. It could be a line of sight airplane, which in case we include a solid nose. It could be an over-under configuration where you have an HD camera on the top like a run cam and a board camera on the bottom. That is completely up to you. What we're going to do is basically show you the theory behind putting the front nose on, and then you can choose the one that's for you. Now because every one of these noses are going to be slightly different, you are going to need to kind of custom trim and custom fit your nose to your specific application. But I'm going to go ahead and take you through the process of just kind of how we're going to tackle this, and then you can do the same. For this, I'm going to go ahead and simply use this piece here. We're going to do foldovers on it, and I'm going to put these other two aside. So let's first go ahead and prepare our piece. Just do our score cuts. Anytime you have a complicated perimeter score cut, what I like to do is just kind of let it roll off the edge, and that'll make it really easy to remove your foam. There's a very good likelihood that you're going to need to cut an additional amount or bevel this. It's all going to be depending on how your actual nose is fit together. And there's two. Let's go ahead and do our reinforcement. This will also kind of give us a nice finished edge. Let's take this right on down. There's one. And then this edge, I don't really want to mess this up, so I'm just going to go ahead, put a thinner bead of glue down. I intend to have a camera on the top and the bottom for this application, so if I didn't need that, I would simply be able to leave the one plug in the side that I want to keep. Now if you're only going to be using one camera in the future, or you want to stick a camera to the outside, you don't need to remove this center plug. You can easily simply just keep it covered or even put a piece of tape over it. Alright, we have both of our pieces prepped. Let's go ahead and give them a quick test fit. And actually, we're not that far off. A little bit of pressure is all we need on this bottom one here, and that's going to fit in very nicely, just like that. Easy way now to glue this in, simply to put a heavy bead of glue right around the perimeter. Notice the temperature of my glue gun is down a little bit, so it's nice and thick. I don't want any glue outside here. Now I can go ahead and place this in one more time. Scrap piece of paper is all I need to kind of melt that in, and then I can go right down to the table, place a nice even pressure, and I'm going to hold that for about 30-40 seconds. Make sure you kind of give it a little move every once in a while to make sure it doesn't accidentally glue to the table. That's my bottom hole. Let's go ahead and do a quick test fit on the top. Top is also pretty close, but you're going to see that I'm going to need to do a bevel cut on this portion around right here. So let's go ahead and do a bevel cut and match that up. Now you may be tempted to not even put a front nose on this. We have test flown it before, and a matter of fact, in our earliest videos when we test flew it, had some pretty weird flight characteristics without that angle, giving us a little bit of a kick. So make sure that you have something like this on the front, even if it's a piece of tape. And that looks pretty close. A little bit more here. Now that I'm happy with the fit, get a nice healthy bead of glue right around the perimeter. Notice I'm not putting it on the main piece, but on the nose, so it all presses back in. And we'll slide this back into place. And now we can take it right down to the table, and we'll hold it nice and flat until it's dry. Now for me personally, I think that this nose is the easiest nose to put on. I can also leave these plugged in if I'm doing line of sight, and it also gives a nice open gap for it to breathe easily. Let's go ahead and give it a quick test fit, but before we do so, let's also install our battery tray and our FPV tray all the way back against its catch. Now if you don't want to use your hook and loop battery straps that are included, you can easily glue down your FPV plate and simply use a piece of Velcro for easy removal. Here goes nothing. Perfect. So our nose sits on nice and neat, and you can also see with our battery tray installed, we have all those different mounting options. Now for mounting this, we're going to use two standard standoffs here, generally about 20 millimeters high, and from that point, you can mount your camera in the exact same way that you'd mount a multi-rotor. The airframe of the FT Flerken is now done. We're ready to move on to our next video, which is going to be your tail options. We're really excited that this has a lot of versatility, and as time goes on, there's going to be different variations of the FT Flerken with motor configurations and tail configurations. Make sure you go down in the description, hit the next video of your playlist, and we'll continue building together.